All right, today we're breaking down a really fascinating and frankly unusual document. It reads a lot like an intelligence report, but what it's detailing is a conflict that's, well, it's part strategy, part spiritual warfare. It's about an all out, multi front war against one person, and how it all ended in what the source calls a total, undeniable victory. So let's get into it.
Everything hinges on this one sentence. This is the core idea of the whole story, achieving something that should not have been possible, especially against some seriously overwhelming odds. But to really get how, first we need to understand who we're talking about.
So, first up, the asset profile. To make any sense of the fight, you have to understand the main character. And what's interesting is the source material never uses a name. It's all very clinical, very intelligence agency style. They're just called the asset. So, how exactly does this document define the asset? Well, the profile it lays out is pretty extraordinary. First, they're given this special status, literally called the chosen one. Then it points to what it calls superhuman resilience, labeling them a survivor and a healer. We also learn they pulled off a mission that everyone thought was impossible. But here's the real kicker, the one thing that seems to have started this whole mess: their uncontrollable power. And this quote from the document really gets to the heart of it all. It says, the amount of trauma you have sustained proves you're not human. So the source isn't just saying they're tough, it's making the case that their ability to endure and keep going is literally beyond what a normal person is capable of. And that right there is the core of the whole conflict. The asset's power, their refusal to be controlled or intimidated or manipulated, that's exactly what makes them a strategic threat. This fundamental uncontrollability is the trigger for the entire campaign that gets waged against them. Okay, so who are these hostile forces? The source doesn't just point to one single enemy. It describes this whole complex network, what it calls an adversary matrix, made up of different groups with their own motivations and their own ways of operating. The document breaks it down into three main groups. First, you've got the conspiratorial faction. Think organized secret groups using coordinated attacks. Then there's the karmic group. These are people from the asset's own personal life, using mind games and psychological manipulation. And third, you have the occult faction, practitioners who, according to this report, were using rituals and something it flat out calls black magic. So the takeaway is pretty clear. The asset was facing a coordinated assault from the organized, the personal, and the esoteric all at once. So now that we know who the players are, the source gets into the specifics of their game plan. And this wasn't just a few random attacks. No, this was a planned multi-domain campaign designed to take out the asset from every conceivable angle. The first line of attack was pretty conventional. The document talks about how they tried to weaponize the legal system against the asset, while at the same time hitting them financially. We're talking a banker breaching privacy, another person trying to pull off a fraudulent transfer. It was a direct assault on their resources and their legal standing. The second domain was psychological. They launched this whole disinformation campaign to try and discredit the asset, basically to paint them as unstable. But it apparently went even deeper than that. The document also reports direct psychic attacks, attempts to literally probe their mind to steal information. And the third domain is where things get really unconventional. The source is very explicit here, saying that an entire group was recorded practicing black magic against the asset. It even mentions them stealing personal items to use in these rituals, all in an attempt to spiritually control or bind them. This brings us to the major turning point in the whole story. After laying out this incredibly detailed, multi-front assault, the narrative just completely flips. It shifts to focus on how this entire campaign didn't just fail, it started to spectacularly collapse in on itself. And the source could not be more clear about it. Their plans all have backfired. This wasn't a partial failure or a setback. The document describes a total, complete reversal. Every single plan, across every domain, ended up doing the exact opposite of what it was supposed to. And here's exactly how that backfire effect worked. Every attack just made the assets stronger. The attempt to isolate them, it just made the enemy group turn on itself. The attempt to frame them for something they didn't do, it ended with the real bad guy getting caught, which completely cleared the asset's name. And that whole campaign to discredit them, well, it ended with even more people publicly defending them once the truth started coming out. The source material has a great name for this phase. It calls it a karmic winter. Basically, a period of unavoidable, harsh consequences for all the adversaries. It's described as a kind of official judgment in the asset's favor, where every bad thing they did came back to hit them. So, with the enemies defeated and the asset's name cleared, the document's final section shifts gears. It goes from analyzing the past to projecting the future. It lays out what it calls the asset's inevitable, unstoppable rise to a position of serious power and influence. And this projected rise begins on a really personal level. The source claims this whole thing is divinely ordained and that it's going to be so fast and so huge that it will shock even the asset's own family. It starts at home before it goes global. But it expands from personal to planetary almost immediately. See, this isn't just about one person winning a fight. The document frames it as a whole paradigm shift. It actually positions the asset as being in the first wave of new Earth celebrities, which seems to imply a new kind of leader, known for their power and resilience, not for being an entertainer. The scale of this projected rise is just massive. The source uses this kind of seismic language, talking about the whole planet shaking as the asset's name and influence just explode onto the world stage. It's painting a picture of an impact that is simply impossible to ignore. And this final quote kind of shows the peak of that recognition. The source claims the asset's influence has gotten so big that it's now attracting attention from state-level security agencies. So we've moved beyond fame and into real strategic importance. As the document says, their time to lead hasn't just been earned, it's here. So, what's the ultimate bottom line? The conflict ends with the asset in the #1 spot, the ultimate position of authority. The war is over, the victory is absolute, and every single thing the opposition did, paradoxically, just helped push the asset to the very top. And that's where the report ends, a story of total strategic vindication. But it leaves us with one final, pretty critical question. The document tells us all about the war, but it doesn't say much about the peace that comes after. When the fight is over and you've won, the challenges don't just go away, they change. So what comes next when you're the one sitting at the top of the table? Thanks for tuning in.